Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 4 of the Classical Republican. Today, we'll be talking about Lycurgus and the constitution of Lycurgus in Sparta. Now, just a reminder that when you read classical texts, a lot of times they refer to the Lacedaemonians or Lacedaemon. That is the area around Sparta. And Sparta was really just a number of small villages, and they were the Spartans never believed in big civic projects. There's a famous quote that the Sparta is not protected by walls; it's protected by men. And so they never had anything that was really that protective, other than the mountains around the area. Now, let's begin with Lycurgus. Now he's kind of a mythical figure. He's not really a historical figure, but he is recognized as the first great lawgiver for a republic. And we're talking about the mixed regime in ancient times. His bust is in the House of Representatives in the United States Capitol. And so he's still recognized as a great lawgiver. Now let's get down to the institutions of Sparta. They had two kings, and they were descended from Heracles. Two kings that were two separate families, but both descended from Heracles. And I'm using Heracles because I'm of Greek descent, and that's how you pronounce it in Greek. You may also know him as Hercules. That is the Latin derivative. Now, my father never. He told me that we were descended from Spartans. I have some other relatives who told me that we were actually descended from the Spartan kings. That's probably made up, but it's a nice family story. So the kings, they had religious and military obligations, and so they didn't really rule as other kings did. They really didn't have a lot of authority until they were out in the field, going to war, and so they didn't really have a lot of civic responsibility. There was also the Gerousia, which was a council of 28 elders. The kings also sat on this council, and they were like the legislature, but they couldn't approve anything by themselves. They had the power to propose, and the people resolved. The people meaning the citizens of Sparta. And so in Sparta, that meant the Spartiates. They were warriors who were trained basically just to fight, and they were the citizens. The Gerousia were elected from that class of people. They had life terms. So, it's called the Council of Elders because you would end up being old on that council. There was also another group of 5 people called the Ephors. Now, the Ephors, also elected from among the citizens, they only served a 1-year term, and this was the executive branch. It started out as kind of helpers to the kings, and eventually they took over all civil executive authority. So I already mentioned the Spartiates. Those are full citizens. There's also the Perioeci. They're non-citizens, but they are Spartans, and they were very important in carrying on commerce and manufacturing because the Spartan citizens didn't do that. And then there were also the Helots, and these were people who they were slaves. And they were enslaved a long time ago, and nobody really understands how or when they were enslaved. It most likely came from when the the Spartans originally, the Dorians actually, before they were Spartan, the Dorian tribe came into Greece from the north and subdued the people. They came in with a story that they were the Heraclidae, or the children of Heracles, and they were back to get what's rightfully theirs, their land. So so they were using, so whoever these people were, the Dorians came in and decided that they could latch on to this story to give themselves legitimacy, and it did a pretty good job. Okay, so there were some other reforms, I guess you could call them, under the Constitution of Lycurgus, and that the biggest one was probably land redistribution. So all the Spartiates had started off with an equal amount of land, and they didn't have much population growth. So there was always a sense of equality among the citizens. They also redistributed movable property, and then they had like laws against extravagance. So even though you could probably get more stuff, become a better consumer, they really discouraged that, and that was just something that was discouraged in Spartan society. They also had iron money, and that was and it was really big and very difficult to handle, very difficult to carry around, and it took up a lot of space if you had a lot of it in your house. So you really didn't want a lot of money. It'd be a real burden. And citizens also ate at a common mess. There were different ones, but and you had to be chosen to or accepted into one. And so you had people eating together, and that's something that we do even to this day in the United States Army. In the military, you eat together, and there's a sense of equality there. Women had the right to own property, and they were also encouraged to exercise and to be strong like the men. So there is, women were very different in this society compared to their to contemporary women throughout Greece and throughout the ancient world, really. They also practiced eugenics. They did this to really strictly for physical strength. In other places in other parts of Greece, it was also used for population control. For what we would call today abortion, for situations like that. They didn't really think of babies as full human beings. They can't take care of themselves. Similar to how people think today, late-term abortions are acceptable early-term abortions are acceptable to late-term abortions. A lot of people make that division because they don't think that the baby is going to be viable, and so that's kind of how the Greeks felt about it. That baby wasn't going to be viable if you leave it out on the side of a road or on a hillside, and maybe some shepherds will come and take the baby and raise it to adulthood. But usually they just died, and so that was a form of eugenics. And I don't mean to practice any presentism. Presentism is a word which is where we in the present judge people in the past by our values. But we still practice eugenics even to this day. In most places, you're not allowed to marry your siblings, your parents, even your aunts and uncles, and your first, in some places, your second cousins. So, that's, and why is that? Why do we have laws against that? Yeah, it's gross, but but it's also a form of eugenics, because those people who would choose to marry and have families in those circumstances would have issues, would have health issues, and the government realizes it's a public health issue, and there needs to be a law against it. So, eugenics, still practiced today. So Sparta was not a democracy. It was not a monarchy. It was not an aristocracy, or maybe you could call it an expanded aristocracy. But it was really a republic because it had all those different institutions, and no one could really dominate over everybody else. So, but it definitely wasn't a democracy, and they had a contempt for democracy. During the Peloponnesian War, they never allied. They usually didn't ally with democracies. That was Athens. That's what they did. Athens propped up the democracies, and Sparta propped up oligarchies. Here's a quote from Plutarch in his life of Lycurgus. He says somebody was talking to Lycurgus and advocating for democracy, and of course democracy at this time is referring to sortition. Okay, everyone's going to have a chance through random selection to be an office holder. And he says, in Lycurgus, this is Lycurgus supposedly speaking, make your own household a democracy first. Okay? So he's talking about making your own household, divvy up the responsibilities through sortition, through random selection. And so if you have children, and maybe you're taking care of your elderly parents too, this would be rather ridiculous, because you and your extended family are not capable of doing all the same chores and responsibilities equally. So that would be seen as rather ridiculous. But that does not mean that you can't make your household a republic. Okay, so you have different institutions. You have the parents and the children, and maybe extended relatives who live there, and so you're not going to, there's not going to be the same type of domination as you would in maybe a nuclear family with very small children. But maybe I should do another video on republicanism within the family. That's something to think about. And Lycurgus, so this is what Lycurgus established. He established this Lycurgan constitution, which is a lot of political philosophers look at it as the first republic. And let's see, here on page 42, in the Life of Lycurgus by Plutarch, he said this is how Lycurgus came to an end, and how his regime lived on. So he summoned everyone to an assembly and declared that while what had been already established was sufficient and appropriate to secure the happiness and excellence of the state, there remained the greatest, most essential measure, which would not be disclosed to them before he had consulted the oracle. Consequently, they must abide by the laws laid down without dropping or changing any until he should return in person from Delphi. On his return, he would do whatever the god recommended. When they unanimously agreed to this and urged him to proceed, Lycurgus made first the kings and elders, and then the other citizens, swear that they would abide by the established constitution and continue to use it until he should return. Then he set out for Delphi. Once he had reached the oracle and sacrificed to the god, he inquired if the laws which he had laid down were of sufficient quality to secure happiness and excellence of the state. The god replied that the quality of the laws was high, and that by adhering to Lycurgus's constitution, the city would enjoy the most brilliant reputation. Lycurgus had this oracle written down and sent it to Sparta. He then made a second personal sacrifice to the god, embraced his friends and his son, and determined never to release the citizens from their oath, but to commit voluntary suicide on the spot. He had reached an age when a choice can properly be made of whether or not to go on living, and when those close to him seemed comfortably enough settled. So he starved himself to death. Okay, so committed the ultimate sacrifice to preserve the Republic. Okay, so now while there are serious issues with the regime that he established, the oppression of the helots, especially, some of the brutality and abuse some of the citizens had to endure. There were some enlightened ideas, for example, on women. But the republics of the Middle Ages removed slavery as an institution from their states. And so republicanism, was shown at that time to be able to survive and to flourish without slavery. And that's something that we take to heart today, that we don't need slavery. Sparta did provide inspiration to political philosophers for ages to come, primarily in the institutions of checks and balances. So that's all I have today from the Classical Republican. Long live the Republic.